Hi loves, welcome to the channel Style by C. Today's tutorial will be a stylish illustration of this beautiful piece. Do subscribe, share to friends, watch, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up. The first thing I went ahead to mark was my half length, and I added 1 inch to it. So whatever you have, add 1 inch to yours. Then make a rule across that line. Then you're going to go ahead and mark your shoulder measurements at the start point line. Okay, then from there come down to 1 inch for your shoulder slope. From there you get your chest line measurements. To get yours, divide your bust by 6, add 1.5 inches to it. You get your bust, you get your chest line measurements. Then I'm going to connect it to my start point line, make a rule on that chest line. Now I'm going to go ahead to mark 3 inches at my start point area, that is for my neck width. I will connect it to my 1 inch shoulder slope. Then I'll divide what I have on my armhole area into 2 to get the midpoint. This is to enable me form an armhole curve. So from the midpoint coming by 0.75 inches, connect to your shoulder slope. Then from there, make a curve into your chest line. Alright, the next point now is from your start point, which is your shoulder. Mark your bust line. Mine is 10 inches, then my under bust is 13 inches. I'll make a straight rule across each point that I have. Then from the center of my pattern paper, I'm going to insert my nipple to nipple measurements. Then I will also label my pattern paper. I have B bust line, U under bust, H hem line or half length. Then I'll connect the points together. That is my nipple to nipple measurements or bust palm measurements. I used for mine. Then on my hem line, I'm going to mark 0.75 inches on both sides. This is for that intake. I will do the same thing on my under bust. Then go ahead and connect them using a straight rule. Then I'm also going to be connecting to my bust line, but I'll be using the curved part of my ruler, alright, to connect to my bust line, just as you see me doing. Now the next thing to do is you're going to go ahead and divide what you have at your shoulder slope into 2 to get the midpoints. Then from there you're going to be connecting to the bust line. Okay, from our start point line now, we're going to determine where our over bust is going to be. So for this, I worked with 6.5 inches, and I'm going to make a straight rule across my 6.5 inches. Now I'm going to go ahead to mark 0.75 inches on both sides of my 6.5 inches. Then I'll connect it to my bust line again, just as you see me doing. Then I'll label it OB, which is over bust. The next point I went ahead to do was to insert my round body measurement. So at my chest line, I had my bust measurements. My under bust, you measure yours and put there. On my waistline, if you want to snatch your waist, you're going to remove 2 inches, 3 inches from your actual waist measurements. So that's what I did. I removed few inches from my actual waist measurements. So the parts I marked, we are taking it off. So we'll be inserting it back into the pattern paper plus 1 inch extra for stitching allowance. So whatever you have at each point, insert it plus 1 inch stitching allowance. Okay, the next step now is to tighten our bust dart. Okay, so we're going to be working on our bust dart. Divide what you have between your bust and under bust measurements, that's the space, into 2. Then connect back to your bust line. This is to create your bust dart, just as you see me doing. I've gone ahead to create my bust dart, and I'm going to be closing up this area that I marked, like it's going off entirely. So now I'm going to be cutting this out to enable me close up my bust dart. I'm not cutting it off entirely, I just cut some piece to enable me close up my bust dart. So I'm going to go ahead now to close that area that I marked. Then when I'm done closing it, I'm going to be using a tape, a solo tape, maybe white tape preferably, to close it to keep the two of them in place. On our over bust now, you're going to measure what you have there. So we had 1.5 inches. I'll be adding it back to the armhole area plus half an inch or 1 inch stitching allowance. Then go ahead and retrace your armhole. So that is what I'm going ahead to do, to retrace my armhole measurement. And this is what we have. The under bust now, I'm going to come up by 1 inch. That is the center of my under bust. I went up by 1 inch. Then I'm going to be connecting it to my new armhole measurements. So I'm going to be using the curved part of this rule to connect the 2 points together. Okay, just watch what I'm doing. Went ahead to connect the 2 points together, and this is what it looks like. At that 1 inch now, I had half an inch already before joining to my armhole measurements, all right, because of my cup joining. Then from the under bust that intake, I'm going to connect to the 1 inch we have. So this is one part of the cup. Then from the other side, that is the second part of the cup. From my other dart intake, I'm going to be connecting to the up. But before then, from your actual body measurements, which is 8.5 for this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead to mark 1.5 inches. You can decide to use 1.25 inches, but to tighten your cup very well, 1.5 is better. So from there, I'm going to be connecting to my dart intake. So I'm going to go ahead now to connect these 2 points together this way. And this is what the cup looks like after connecting the 2 points together. All right, so the next thing now is to go ahead and cut these pieces, cut them into pieces. So I'm going to cut these upper parts first. The next step is to determine how your neck depth is going to be. So for this, I'm going to use 4 inches for my neck depth. You can decide to use lower, you can decide to use 3.5 inches, depending on how deep you want yours to actually be. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead to cut out these pieces, or cut this pattern paper into pieces, so your armhole measurement will remain the same. That is for your yoke area, but for the down parts, after joining, everything will align together. Okay, so go ahead and cut out the other parts of your corset. I'll keep this aside, we'll still come back to it later. So this is for the center. I'm going to join these two together using a tape before cutting on my fabric. Then this, we're going to be cutting out our dart intakes we have there. But before then, we're going to be forming our 3-part corset. Our corset is going to be 3 parts. The upper one, then the 2 that is going to be down. All right, so from the center, we have 1.5 inches there, 1 inch. All right, so from that midpoint now, which is where the under bust is, where the bust line is, I'm going to come down to half an inch. That is from my bust line, I'm going to come down to half an inch. Then I'm going to be making a curve to form a half circle shape on top. Okay, just as you see me doing. Please note, you can also do this with your free hand. Whichever way that is fine for you is okay. Now we're going to go ahead to cut this piece off or out. Then we'll cut out our dart intake we have at that point. Please note, while transferring these papers to your fabric, ensure that you add seam allowance, maybe 1 inch on all sides of it or half an inch on all sides of it, okay, to avoid shortage of material. Like here now, we have just one is bigger than the other. So what I have to do while sewing is to, or while cutting on my fabric, is to add enough so it will align together. All right, so I'll hold it down using a tip X. So guys, this is for the upper cup, this is for the lower cup. So we have our 3 parts corset cup. Now I'm going to be joining the down part of the cup together using a tape, a white solo tape, to create like a curved cup. Please note that this is a paper. It's not really going to come out like when you are sewing on your fabric. Please take note of that. All right, so I'm going to try my best to hold these two papers together to form my cup, and this is what I have. Now I'm going to be joining it to the upper one. So this is the upper part of the cup. It's going to go ahead to join with the down parts of the cup, forming our 3 parts. Then for this one now, note that I said I'm going to be holding it down using a tape. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. You join the upper one to the lower one, then go ahead to join it at this area. So guys, the next thing I went ahead to was to pin it on my dress form. As you can see, this is how it is. So this is what it will actually look like on yours. All right, so this is the down part of the cup. I've already fixed this area. So this is a paper. It's not really going to look like when you sew on your fabric. And when sewing, you need interfixing for yours. So you actually need interfacing. Please, it's very important so that it will all align, like it will give you that stiffness. So this is what it looks like. You see the corset cup curve, the V-neck shape that is up here. Okay, now this is where your tool is going to be, which is this piece now. It's going to be here. Clear. This is our cup. This is the corset. This is our yoke. Okay. I'm going to be using this black to signify that this area is the yoke. Okay, this is your yoke part of your dress, and this is what the cup looks like. It will come in as a V shape here. This is for the skirt part of our dress. I'm going to be needing at least 12 inches long. Depending on how long you want yours to be, you can also decide to make it more deeper. Alright, so I'm using 12 inches for this. Then I'm going to go ahead and mark my start point line, which is my waist line. Okay, then I'll make a rule across that point. From that point, I'm going to insert my waist measurement. Please note, you also use the waist measurements you use for the upper parts of your gown. That is the corset area of your gown. Don't forget that, please. Then from there, I'm going to come down to 8 inches for my hip measurements. All right, and I'll insert my hip measurement at that point. Mine is 9.5 inches. I'll go ahead to connect it to my waist. Okay, from the hip line, I'm going to go down to the hem of my skirt. Okay, that is just what we have at that point. From the picture on the thumbnail, you notice that the hip area is very hipsy, like it's an artificial hip, not that it's padded. Okay, so from the waist now, we're going to be extending it. So from your waist, you mark about 5 to 6 inches. All right, so I'm using 6 inches or 5.5 inches. I'm going to make a stretch through across that point. Then I'll go ahead and mark about 4 inches outward from that 5.5 inches I marked. Okay, Then from there, I'm going to be connecting to my waist measurements. So connect it to your waist measurements, just like what we have, or just like what I'm doing now. So from the hipsy points, I'm going to be coming down to the hem of the skirt. Okay, just like the normal way you crease your skirt's curve. So that's what I did. Now we have that hipsy point. Okay. The next point to take now is to make our curve at the hem of our skirt. So I'll start from the center point. Just make some kind of artificial curve first. Okay. I'm using a free hand. Let's see what it's going to look like first before we cut. I think it's fine this way. Then I'll go ahead and use my scissors to cut it out. So when we are done, this is what we have. Now open it up. This is what it looks like. So please, if yours is not that curvy, all you have to do is go ahead to make it more curvy. You can still decide to reduce it depending on how full you want it to actually be. Okay, so go ahead and do your adjustments, and please note, don't you have to add interfacing. Maybe use a peplum stay for this skirt part if you want it to actually stand very well, like what you have with the thumbnail. So this is what we have. Ensure to use a thick peplum stay, not a gum stay, thick peplum stay, to achieve the standing effect.